Caddis Maximus here, this time with a quick review and comparison of various plastic pipe, PVC pipe, hose, and tubing cutters. Now, I've done a big dedicated review of these Apollos, which as far as PVC pipe and any kind of soft material pipe rope are pretty much one of the best that I've found so far, especially for their price. We have some more traditional styles, such as these Orbits and these Ridgids here. These are actually Japanese-made Ridgids. One thing to mention is when you get these types of tools that are really cheap, these Orbits are the most common style that are knocked off. And the Orbits are more of the original ones made in Taiwan, but the Chinese ones, they use such a low-quality steel that even cutting PVC pipe ends up dulling and dinging up the blades. One thing to mention about all these type of pipe and hosing cutters is they all have basically razor sharpened blades, so they'll cut nice and easily and smoothly, especially if you have anything with fiber reinforcing in it. That means that you absolutely cannot cut any metals, not even copper wire. These Ridgid Cut-Rights are kind of advertised as a universal cutter, but they have the same thing where they have a razor sharp edge, and you can see those glints of light. Those are all dings on the blade from me just cutting copper wire. And so these things can really only be used with essentially plastics, maybe some woods, that kind of thing. Rope and, synthetic rope and line, etc. So traditional ones such as these Orbits, they work okay. And if you get a higher quality one, they'll have higher quality steel, and so the blade won't wear out quite as easily. But traditionally, you'd have to grab them, pull them apart with two hands just to get them to open up. You do something like put in a piece of hose, such we have here. It's about the maximum capacity for this. And as you cut it, it will dive down. And if it's PVC pipe, then the blade kind of gets jammed in the plastic of the PVC. So when you release the handle, it will want to continue to cut down. And in this situation, you can see where I had to hold the blade to prevent it from wanting to bounce back up, because otherwise it just does this action and doesn't actually want to cut. And so if you're using it to cut hose or even some types of rope, you'll have an issue because you actually have to use, instead of holding the rope, you have to use two hands to kind of hold the blade to prevent it from wanting to do that or intentionally retract. So if we pull this piece of hose out of here, otherwise these things work well, and if you get a decent brand like the Orbits, they'll hold up just fine, especially for cutting PVC pipe. The reason the Apollos are so much different is like a variety of aspects. You don't want to get these with plastic handles at all, especially this ratcheting style, because they just end up flexing, and it indicates how cheap they really are, and this won't work out. One other thing is whatever design you get, some really strange ones actually have the blade bolted to some other mechanism on the side or another plate, and the blade's not driven along the center line. Where all these, including the Ridgid, the blade has the ratchet directly built into the back of the blade, and so it drives it down center, and if it doesn't do that, then the blade wants to walk off from one side or the other. These types of tools do cut pretty straight. You just have to make sure to hold on to them straight and ratchet them straight. Otherwise, most times when I've seen complaints about people having these types of tools cutting straight, they're not actually holding the tool straight. Especially when they start ratcheting, they start wrenching it from one side to the other, and of course they'll drive the blade to one side or the other. If you actually hold it square, they will cut square. The reason Apollos or the professional grade is, one, when you want to release, it does have a spring-loaded handle. So on most of these, when they do ratchet, the Orbits aren't bad because the spring on the ratchet itself makes the handle have a kind of a spring-loaded action. But these Apollos genuinely are spring-loaded. They also have finer pawls, so you get more leverage. They move less for each closing of the handle, but you have to put in less force, and they really cut nicely. The Apollos set themselves apart because you can just squeeze the handle, and it automatically releases the catch. And then they have a spring-loaded blade and a button, so you just press the button, and it flips the blade right open, which is amazing. And then they have a double pawl mechanism, so when you're cutting, say, rope or hose, as you ratchet it down, it automatically locks the blade on each ratchet step, and it can't be pushed backwards. You can release it by pressing the release button quite hard, which is a nice aspect. All the other designs, you're going to have to stop cutting and use both hands and release whatever the tube that you're holding on to. just to pull it back open. So it's really nice. That's a one-handed action. But the other advantage is against soft materials such as this hose. As you step down, it'll just continue to cut and squeeze down until it's gone all the way through the unit. Or excuse me, gone all the way through the cut. And they actually cut pretty well. This wasn't perfect, a little bit of furries, just because it was such a short piece I wanted to pull some of it out. Under most normal situations, these do cut very nicely just because of how sharp they are, especially on something like this, which is the heavy-duty diesel truck-rated radiator hose. I talked about these Ridgids, and I use them generally for cutting belting and other small things, and belts in particular. I found many situations when if you're replacing a belt, say on automotive or any type of equipment, many times it's easier just to cut the current belt off and then, release tension instead of actually having the belt on the unit. I've noticed when a belt's under tension and then you're trying to release a tension bolt or something, you're still working against quite a bit of resistance and it's a little bit slow. And if you're replacing the belt, why not just get in there and cut it off? And then you don't have any tension on the whatever is providing the belt tension. And then you can easily thread it down, put on the new belt, and then your effort's only spent retensioning a belt. That's one of the great things about these Ridgids. They're also quite nice for cutting plastics, and when you want some nice straight cuts, they just don't have much throat or much clearance. They do work really well for other situations, such as when you're cutting belting, wire wrap, that kind of thing, because they just work super nice just for getting a nice sharp cut, and they'll just snap it right off like that. So that would be an example of Ridgid Cut-Rights. These are some OEM, these are actually sold as heater hose cutters, and they don't work very well at hose at all because it just isn't sharp enough, and it tends just to want to crush the hose down, and they're basically useless for what they're sold for as heater hose cutters. But when you're cutting something with just a little bit more rigidity, such as this belting, the design actually really is nice because it kind of pokes through at first, and then each of the wedges slice the wall of the tubing. And when you cut it down, what's amazing is where it totally doesn't work on soft hose, on something with just a little bit more rigidity, they work excellent. And so that was one, and a lot of people kind of wonder what this is because they kind of look weird, and that's what they're sold for. And so I hardly use them, but in situations where you're cutting thin wall hard plastic, they're actually pretty nice because they're less likely to crush it than even any of these other tools. This is just a basic style where it just is like a pair of scissors. It's just a single action. What's interesting is there's many like $50 plus PVC pipe cutters, like what these are targeted for, that are just really heavy-duty versions of these with big hinges and all metal and long handles. The problem with those is that you have long handles, so they have to be used with two hands. You can't one-hand it at all, even when you're cutting. And then you have very little leverage, so it ends up making it a lot of effort. And I generally don't recommend them. And then in this situation, such as this Japanese Ridgid, this is one of the Ridgid makes actually a lot of tools involving pipe and tubing, etc. from Ridgid are very good. Sometimes, some of the best, or, along with the best. But as far as these, and these are large capacity 3-inch PVC cutters, they're just built like the Orbits or any other style. They have a little bit of a spring-loaded action, just because of this spring that's holding the ratchet pawls. But one thing that was disappointing is there's only 5 steps on here, and that they just operate in every other traditional fashion where you have to pry them apart with your hands and then ratchet them up. And then, like in this situation, it kind of is not wanting to catch the next ratchet pawl. And so that can be an issue. And it's what makes some of these tools so disappointing. This Ridgid's really nice and very heavy duty, nice and large, cast aluminum body. A good quality blade, and I did want to mention that these Ridgids have been used quite a bit, and you can see that the blade, if my camera would focus, is actually in pretty decent shape. If you don't cut copper wire and other stuff with these and actually stick to cutting rope and tube and PVC pipe, then the blades will last a good amount of time. If you buy really cheap, such as knockoff versions, they have such poor quality blade steel that even cutting plastic PVC pipe will cause the fine edge to fold over and get damaged, and then it kind of crushes the pipe instead of cutting through it. And so that's one reason, at least get something that's halfway decent, unless you're only planning on using them a couple of times. But I've heard, even had people comment about when I did the review on these, where they've bought cheap versions of these type of PVC pipe cutters, and in 10 uses had the blade get folded over and become ineffective. And so that's pretty disappointing, to buy a tool, a cutting tool, and to make 10 cuts and to have it not be usable anymore. Is essentially a waste of your money. So you definitely want to get some halfway decent version of these. And then to point out here, they do make nice large versions too, such as these 3-inch Ridgids. Anyway, I'll go ahead and conclude my little review and comparison of various hose, tubing, and plastic pipe cutting tools. I really appreciate everybody watching, and please subscribe. Catus Maximus out.